Hello and welcome to the Brass Band Podcast. I'm Sarah Bauman.
And I'm Kenny Crookston. And together we're here to talk about all things brass banding, from the unique individual stories to the innovative developments and the future of this musical culture. So, whether you're a seasoned brass band lover,
Just getting started,
or just curious, you're in the right place.
let's go! Welcome back, listeners. I hope you enjoyed the first episode in this series of the Brass Band Podcast. This week, we've got another special guest who we're going to speak to a little bit later in the episode, the wonderful Dr. Anita Collins. She's a music educator, researcher, scientist, and advocate for all things music education. Dr. Anita Collins' research is all about how music making is good for you and for your brain. Welcome, Kenny. Do you think brass banding's good for you?
Undoubtedly, yes. I mean, there is only one answer to that in my case. And for everybody, really, there is actual academic research out there that demonstrates that it is good for your mental health in so many different ways. Certainly from my point of view, it's been a huge part of my life for forever, really. Probably before I can even remember. So, yeah, I'd like to think so. But there's so much evidence that music in general is good for people. Participation in music, probably even more so.
Music education is something that we care a lot about at BBE, creating opportunities for young people. But everyone takes slightly different routes in terms of their music education. I probably had more of a traditional, music education route. I had one-to-one lessons. And then when I was good enough, then I played in the wind band, and then I played in the swing band and did things like that.
Before you started playing the cornet every week.
Yeah, exactly. But that was the route you were put on. You had lessons. If you were good enough, then you were allowed to do more. What was your music education like, Kenny?
Probably how not to do it would be the best description of my music education. I mean, it was a lot longer ago, obviously. This was the early 1970s. And to be honest with you, it was very, very unconventional even then, because I was brought up in a band at a time when most people were still probably starting to learn in school. Some bands had learners groups. The one I played for did have one, but I was playing in a competing band when I was 9-year-old. Yeah, it's a bit unconventional by the way they do things today. But they approached it back then, a couple of old guys that took the boys, mainly boys it was. There were some girls in the band, but it was mainly boys. And they took them on a Monday night at 6 o'clock or something like that before the main band rehearsal. And it was you get this right or you'll get a slap over the ear kind of approach to things. So I don't remember it making me practice any harder, to be perfectly honest with you. But yeah, I really kind of traditional approach to it. But I would say that the vast majority of my music education took place in a band room. I did do music at school up to a certain age. I didn't take it anywhere beyond O-level back then, sort of GCSE level as an academic subject, but I was still very keen on my banding at that time. And the thought of going to do music at university just never occurred to me. At that time, it wasn't a common thing for many people to do. Formal music education is very, very limited. But I'd say my band and music education has been fantastic, just based on experiences, based on what you can take off the person that's sitting next to you. In some cases, some fantastic musicians, great players, challenging characters sometimes. It's not just about the musical side, it's what you learn about life. Sitting next to a fairly challenging principal cornet player when I was 18. Great player, very challenging guy, but an incredible personality. It really does kind of equip you for a lot of what follows in life. So a lot to be thankful for. But, it wasn't all just sweetness and roses.
I think it's one of the things that I was so fascinated about and still am when it comes to brass banding is the intergenerational nature of it, that it is so normal for a 9-year-old and a 90-year-old to sit next to each other and play together. And I think that's just so invaluable.
It is, and every band around the country almost will have some element of that. Anything beyond a youth band, you're going to find that just about everywhere. Even some of the great championship section bands that we have, there's some very experienced players amongst there sitting with young students and the like. But it's such an important thing as well when you think about it. I think one of the things that brass bands are suffering from quite badly at the moment and really need to address is the passing of the baton of experience from one generation to the next, which used to happen within a band players tended to play with the same band for a long time. Typically in their town or village, they maybe moved from one to another, but players didn't move around anywhere near as much as they do now. So you could go to something like Bellevue or the Albert Hall and sit and listen, you'd know that was fairies that were on there, maybe had a brighter sound than Black Dyke did, or Brighouse would be brighter again. That was the culture within that band at the time, and obviously something that was passed on from one generation to another. These characteristics would have lasted literally for generations. I think that is something that bands need to think about more, is having, let's say, the principles that banding that have been in place for a certain period of time can easily get lost if you're losing a lot of players, if you're turning over players, or there's a change of leadership, or there's a change of conductor too frequently. It's very important that bands keep a hold of that is their character, their culture, their values. There's only good things about carrying them from one generation to another. And I think that's something that probably bands need to think about.
I think it's reflective of the way society's changed. We move around for work a lot more. You're less likely to stay in the same place where your family are, where your parents played, where your grandparents played, and stay in that town. So you can lose that connection quite quickly, particularly that end of school, university age can be a really big shift for people when they move away to university, for example. They're looking for that community again and trying to find it. And uni brass do really great work in supporting in that area and encouraging people along. But a lot of people will go from playing with the band that their parents played in and having that community there, moving away, trying to find their place, maybe landing somewhere else for their work life, and they're having to find that along the way. And I think that's really challenging.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things we're seeing more of is people who are going back to banding, having gone through that, but they're going back to when their own children are taking it up. So you're finding people who maybe have had a 15, 20-year gap in their banding experience, but can still find it rewarding when they go back there. It's good to be able to just kind of press the reset button on these things sometimes and go back and have a different type of banding experience as well.
Yeah, and some people will have associations about what their experience was like playing with a championship band, and they can't see their child playing that, and actually what banding can offer is a lot broader than that. But we see it all the time with children who start playing and parents who might sit at the back of the band room and go, oh, that's interesting, whether they have played or not before. What that intergenerational learning does is allows that parent to be handed a cornet and to sit along and play as well. There are very few environments where that would happen, where that option is even available as an adult learner or encouraged, or where it would be a normal situation to do that. It's an incredibly unique thing that we need to hold on to.
Yeah, and I guess it all comes back to what we spoke about in the previous episode, about banding really being about community more than anything else.
The bands that I speak to frequently feel incredibly passionate that music education is a duty for them. It's something that they should do. They feel very passionately about that. Lots of bands will be very lucky in that they might have a music teacher who donates their time, or they have a paid agreement with them, or someone who has suitable skills that can do that. But it's not always the case. And I think regularly you'll find very generous volunteers who learn teaching and do that in their volunteer time because they feel it's so important. That is a truly amazing thing.
One of the things that we found during COVID, especially, made an awful lot of interaction with individuals and bands during that period, was how important that their band was to them. And this became especially obvious when it was withdrawn from them.
Yeah.
And looking at especially more elderly people who might have a situation in which the band is only kind of regular foundation stone in their life. And you think you're seeing more bands that are aimed at older people, like daytime bands. And the social benefits of this are incalculable.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about subjects like dementia and the like. We were both at a conference last year. There was a fascinating talk about dementia, and there was a gentleman talking about forming the soundtrack of your life and what an important thing that is to do while you can still do it with full kind of control of your faculties. It's the last thing that goes when dementia really starts to take hold.
Yeah.
They still recognise music. They can still sing along with Frank Sinatra, but they don't recognise members of their own family.
Yeah.
I think for that point of view, the impact on people's well-being at a certain age of being in a band, just having a good friendly relationship with young people in a healthy music-making environment has only got to be good for you.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people as well, there's the regularity that a brass band provides. You do similar things every week and you sit in the same place when you're 80 and you've been doing that since you were 8. The idea of having that taken away is incredibly difficult. And I know of some bands that have gone well over and beyond to make sure some members of their band can keep on playing. We think about music education just being for young people a lot of the time, and it's not. It's about everyone being included.
And out there is a band for everybody, every level of ability, ambition, commitment, age. There is no limit on the type of people who can play in brass bands. So there is a band there for you somewhere if you want to go looking for one. Even somebody like you that never practices, Sarah.
Yeah, there's one out there. I know it. Okay, so let's hear from the experts. Here's Dr. Anita Collins talking about how brass banding is good for the brain. Okay, welcome to this episode's guest interview. We've got someone on today who is a little bit of a legend in the Brass Bands England education team. So we're really, really excited to have her. But first of all, I'd like to introduce our Brass Foundation's Programme Manager, Sheila Allen. Hi, Sheila.
Good morning.
Sheila's going to be joining us today as our guest interviewer. So our special guest is the wonderful Dr. Anita Collins. Hi, Anita.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us on the other side of the world. We've managed to find a time that works for the UK and Australia. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your research. There is so much for us to talk about.
Oh, I could talk about anything. I am at my core a music teacher and still a practicing music teacher, but I have taught in universities. I've taught and I've done study into music learning and brain development through my PhD, and I got fascinated by it, and I just wanted to share all the research. It was so important to me. It wasn't just about music, it was about all learning, and music was the prism to which we understand how the human brain learns. And I just wanted to have, first of all, music teachers and musicians themselves to understand that, first of all, and then to be able to have language to share that with others. So that's the work that I do now, and I help lots of organisations all over the world now, some in England, some in Australia, US, New Zealand, Canada, to help them to figure out how to advocate well for music, but also to understand and improve the way they teach music.
Anita, my burning question, what are the main ways in which playing a musical instrument impacts brain development, particularly in young learners?
Okay. How long have we got? I do what I call the headlines, which are like the top things. The main thing is that learning a musical instrument is the most challenging activity for the brain to do. Now, the brain responds to challenge by going, oh, wow, I'm being asked to do something hard, so I need to do two things. One, I actually need to grow. So it means that, all of the brains of the people that are listening, you've got 130% more grey matter in your brain. You've got 25% more white matter. You've actually just got more inside your skull. And then the second thing is, because it's challenging, it has to make the brain really efficient. So it's like, wow, this is really hard. I've got to use the energy I have in the most efficient way I possibly can. Our brains are always growing and changing, but they're particularly plastic and particularly in a learning phase when we are children and really up to the age of anywhere between 21 to 25. So by learning a musical instrument during that time, and particularly then continuing a musical instrument, means that we're constantly challenging the brain and it has to operate at its optimum level. With kids, this shows up in 3 different areas. One is language development. So there's a causal relationship between the fact that when you learn a musical instrument, your grasp of language, your ability to understand language, use language, any kind of communication is much, much better. The second one, my favourite one, is executive function, which is basically all those skills we need to operate as an independent adult. But in childhood, kids don't have those yet. So they're actually learning them through learning a musical instrument and creating all of the networks that they need for that executive function to work really well, which is why they are into adulthood. They have a tendency to do a lot better in terms of adjusting to being independent, adjusting to when they change jobs, to making good decisions for themselves, to having strong and ongoing relationships. It all kicks in adulthood. And then the last one is social skills, the actual ability to understand oneself, understand how to behave in a positive way in society, how to help others, how to benefit from helping others as well, and just even how to have a conversation. Like, when is it my turn to speak in a conversation actually is a musical process in the brain. So almost like that concept of melodies that we're exchanging. So, I mean, those two things, if we think about it, it's a human being who can communicate really well through language, who has all the skills they need to navigate adult life really, really well and positively, and then to be able to create new friendships, be really strong in a social setting so that they really take care of themselves from that perspective of feeling connected with society. So really, in the end, what learning music in childhood does is set kids up really well for adulthood and to manage all that comes their way.
Is there an optimum age, Anita, to learn an instrument?
Okay, you'll get used to. I'm probably going to say this a few times. Yes and no, or it's not as easy as black and white as optimum age. They used to think probably 12 years ago now that they were using music to understand if there was this key learning time, which they had a theory was 0 to 7, which has been proved correct. We're born with wiring in our brains. Some of it's genetic, some of it has to do with gestation, some of it has to do with the birth process. But we're born with a set of wiring, which is why, you know, anyone who's got more than one child in a family goes, I've got 2 kids and they're very different. And it's because of that process they've been through. And then on the first 7 years of life, we go through this huge time when kids are like a sponge and they take in everything and they're in their first wiring of their brain. So whatever they started with, it's going, right, how am I going to use this? So they thought that was the most important time to start before the age of 7. And yes, it actually is. But they've also done research to go, okay, kids that have never learnt a musical instrument before the age of 7 or even before the age of 14, what impact does it have when they start? And they've found the impact is quite similar to even if you started when you were really young. The other thing is it can actually, that's a wonderful thing about music learning, it can act as an intervention. So it can help kids who haven't had the greatest start at life and actually help their brain to grow really, really quickly. But it can also, at the same time, work as an enhancement. So kids that have had this typical learning journey through their life then take up a musical instrument, just goes, woo, big challenge, right? Let's grow again. They've done that through the lifespan of human beings. They've done it with every decade of life. And they've found really similar things all the way through, that the challenge that learning a musical instrument has forces the brain to grow or to become more effective, both of those things. And it's really powerful, particularly in our 40s, apparently is the best decade to start a musical instrument if we haven't before, because it is the most stressful time of our life generally. And it's the time when we need to make sure that we have social connection and really good self-care. And interestingly enough, music learning does that in the brain. It actually forces it to go, oh, I need to really take care of myself here. So it has different impacts all the way through life. And yes, it's really important that we start kids really young. But if they've missed out, this is always a worry of parents. It's like, okay, my kid's 9, have I missed the boat? Is it worth even trying? And the answer is absolutely yes.
So it's a categorically good thing for you.
Yes.
I think that's what you're telling me. Amazing.
Yeah. And very little possibility of being a bad thing. And the only time that happens is if you're taught in a way that is not affecting good development. So sometimes, you know, we don't get the best teachers and sometimes that is not great for our development. But in general, it can't be a bad thing. It always is a good thing if taught really well.
Obviously, this is the brass band podcast, so we have to look for some brass band specificity. Are there any unique learning opportunities that you think a brass band provides compared to other ensembles like orchestras or choirs?
Yeah, I'd say the uniqueness comes with being a wind instrument. So I'd say exactly the same thing for, say, concert band. But part of what's really important about any wind ensemble is that we breathe together. Mm-hmm. And that concept, if you've ever been in a yoga class and you've all breathed at the same time, there's something that happens. There's a collective connection that happens for us when we breathe at the same time. Similarly, when we move at the same time, this is where dance comes into it. When we move at the same time with each other in kind of a patterned way, it has incredible impacts on our body and our brain. It very much aligns a lot of our cortisol. So if our cortisol is too high, it brings it down. If our cortisol is too low, it brings it up. And this happens in singing, but it also happens in wind playing. Our heartbeats align. After only a couple of beats, everyone's heartbeat starts to come into sync with each other and our body temperatures align. So that concept of feeling connected and a team and that very, very visceral human feeling connected and safe within that connection happens through music playing together. I did it this morning. I had concert band this morning. And the most wonderful thing we did was every time we go to do something, everyone breathes at the same time. And as the rehearsal goes through, I hear them get better and better at breathing and then playing at the same time. And there's something about the fact that we are one. We are a team and we literally breathe like one lung. And it's when I observe, say, string playing, for example, it's not nearly as visceral as an experience because they have a lot more physical movement that they do. Now, that has an impact as well, but it's just a little bit different. So I think that's the one thing that I think about any kind of wind instrument is really, really powerful and very, very good for body and brain all at the same time.
What a gorgeous image. Everyone's heartbeats aligning. Isn't that beautiful?
So moving on from that a little bit, in brass playing, there's a strong interplay between breath control, embouchure, dexterity and reading music. How do these physical skills interact with cognitive learning?
Well, like I was saying, it's really, really challenging. If we think about what has to happen prior to a sound coming out at the same time, there's so much what's called prediction. And prediction is a really important thing that the brain does. Weirdly, like AI and these large language models we have are doing exactly that. They're just predicting what's the next most likely word. That's what's happening in our brain. And the ability to predict what comes next, and therefore what I have to do prior to that, is a really important mechanism in the brain and one that often denotes levels of intelligence, and it changes the levels of intelligence because it's going, I need to do this here, and therefore what I need to do beforehand is, in whatever order we do it, look at what note we're going to play, put down the vowels we need to play, prepare the breath within our body, make sure that our embouchure is ready, push the air through at exactly the right time so every note speaks at the same time. And that's really, really, really hard to do. And because it's hard to do, the brain has to work it has to work backwards. And that transfers across to everything. I've got to change the tyre on the car. That's the ultimate when the sound comes out, the tyre's on. But what are all the things I need to beforehand? What do I need to find? Where do I need to put things? How do I make sure I'm safe? All of that sort of stuff has to happen. And that's kind of planning. So that's executive function. But it's also predicting what to do. And also, even more importantly, when something goes wrong. So we've all had that in either rehearsal, but I'm sure we've all had performances where it's like, that never happened, like ever. Something really strange happens. That ability to think on the fly and go, someone just came in a whole beat early and it's putting out everything that we're going to do. What do we do? Because we don't stop the piece and we don't say, oh, stop, okay, well, that was wrong. If we're in performance, we go, no, we've got to keep going. And there's this really interesting thing that happens that collectively a whole bunch of people who are playing together can think and go, this is how we solve the problem. And it's wonderful to watch in professionals, especially when they do shows and they've done like 30 of them and then something very strange goes wrong and they're able to adapt without speaking to each other and just going, right, this is how we fix the problem. And they get back on track and everything is fine. So that's a really important part of the brain as well. So not only predicting what do I need to do before I play or when I'm coming in or all of that, but also if there's a problem or something that's unexpected, how do I solve the problem? And how do I solve it as part of a group? And that's a really interesting thing is group music playing is incredibly powerful for that executive function development because you have to solve it for the betterment of the group. You're not just the only one going, well, you all got it wrong, you have to follow me. That's not how music works. And so understanding what it actually feels like to be in a team, and then as a team, how do you solve a problem? I don't know if that answered your question, Sheila, but I went on a tangent, so I thought I'd go.
No, I think we got there. I was listening intently.
I think what your real superpower is, Anita, is your combined knowledge and your passion for advocacy. Those two things together are such an amazing thing. And it's a challenging time for arts and culture, for education, for music education, definitely in the UK. What are the most compelling arguments that parents, music teachers, everyone working in bands can use to advocate for development and sustainability of music programs?
It's so interesting going from the Australian context and then visiting overseas and going, okay, what's the same and what's different? And in the end, very little is different. I think the most important thing we can say is it's not just music. So a lot of people will look at brass banding, will look at any kind of musical thing and go, well, there's a whole bunch of myths that come with it, which is you only learn music if you're going to be this exceptional musician as opposed to being part of it for the rest of your life. That's really important. You only get the opportunity to do it if your parents can pay. It's not seen as this part where it's just a universal right for everybody. I think there's a real thing about talent. And if you're not perfect or great, then you shouldn't be playing on the field. And that's not okay either. So I think a lot of what I do is try and connect the dots between, yes, a child is learning music, but they're developing all these transferable skills and then being able to explain how they could use those transferable skills. Can I use an example that I just heard last week from someone?
Yeah.
It was great. So she was talking, it's a teacher who was talking about the fact that she was working in a high school. So she was working with the two top years of school, which for you would be 12 and 13. And the whole bunch of kids were choosing not to do music. And this was a kind of school where the kids, a lot of them went off to be doctors and actuarial and commerce and lawyers and all sorts of those sorts of things, a lot of doctors. And the kids were choosing not to do music because they were trying to get the highest grade they possibly could in order to get into university. So what was happening, though, interestingly, there's a medical school, training school that's very, very close to the school. And they heard about this and they actually approached the school. So this is like a university going to a high school and saying, can you please make sure that you are encouraging students who want to be doctors, particularly surgeons, to do music in year 11 and 12? And they went, sure, but why? Like, they're not getting great marks out of this because of the way the system's working at the moment. Why would you want that? And they said every single one of their students in their first year failed their fine motor skills. So all these kids were enrolled to be surgeons. That was their trajectory. And yet in first year, every single one, 100% of them failed their fine motor skills. And the medical school went, hang on, what's the difference? And they went through the cohort and hardly any of them have learnt music. And the previous cohorts, a lot of them had learnt music. And then they dug into the research and went, oh my goodness, this is the training ground for this completely different profession, and we really need them to have these skills. And I thought it's a perfect example of how we would never put those two things together, but that transferable skill, not only the fine motor skills, I'm absolutely positive it will do with empathy, and it will come with the ability to memorize and to remember all the information they need to remember, to solve problems. All of that sort of stuff is taught through the music learning process and is valued by different professions. And that's the story I want to tell. And I want to counter the story that it's only for the talented, the rich, and those who are going to be musicians, basically, because that's not the story of music learning. And it shouldn't be the story. And I want to give a different story so people can start to go, oh, if I want to be a surgeon, I need to learn music. That would be my goal in the end. That was the narrative that came across to everybody.
Incredible. There's a school in the north of England known for putting more music into their day in order to improve maths.
Yeah.
So instead of adding more maths to the curriculum, they're adding music, and it is improving maths. So it's a similar kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. What they're developing is their abstract thinking network. We don't have a math center in the brain. We have an abstract thinking network, which we apply to all sorts of things. And the better that is, the better the brain can then go, oh, now let's think about numbers over here. And then it applies that to that. And then same thing with scientific concepts. And it works so easily. And we have these great educators, but we also have the structures already. We're doing the same thing in Australia. Literacy and numeracy is not improving, and yet all they're doing is saying we need more time on literacy and numeracy, and they're not looking at the fact that there are potentially other things at play that could be more beneficial and you could get the results that you wanted, because they keep trying the same thing and expecting a different result. And what we really need is for them to be able to say, look, potentially the way we're doing it is not working. Let's go and look at the research, which in our field is very strong, and see what else we can do to help our literacy and numeracy scores. And where they are doing it in Australia, it's highly effective.
So how would you advocate for that in a local school? If you're a parent, for instance, how could you go into a school, say, my child needs to improve in maths? What kind of things could that parent say to the leadership teams in schools?
Well, they could start with, I've heard a wonderful podcast. They were talking about it. But it's actually not a bad way to start, because it's really hard for a parent to rock in and say, I read this research. But podcasting is such a fantastic medium for getting people to talk about areas of expertise. So even starting with that and just saying, dear head teacher, you're doing a fabulous job. I'm really interested in making sure that my child is doing as well as they possibly can. What are the music learning opportunities that do exist at the school? And what do you need to improve those and make sure every student gets this opportunity? Which is a whole different way of going, why isn't music at the school? And the head teacher going, honestly, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to implement it. I didn't learn a musical instrument. This is a whole different planet to me. And I work very closely with principals over here in Australia and talking to them and asking the question, what gets in the way of putting a universal music program in for every child? That's a really rich question, because it gets, well, they haven't got the space. Fantastic. Let's talk space. Let's figure these things out. We haven't got time in the timetable. Okay, here's another principal. Have a chat to them. This is how they reorganise their timetable to make sure music was there for every child. My teachers don't like them coming out of class because they're missing important learning. Fantastic. No worries. Let's look at how each child is doing, and let's do a trial with these kids and go, okay, let's see how their literacy and numeracy scores have changed, because they will after a year, but even better after 18 months. And let's talk to the teachers about how having less students in the class can mean that they really can focus in on the kids who need their help at that particular time. So I think there's lots of ways around it. I think music requires just a little bit more bending and twisting and changing of things. And when things are going okay, it's like, why should we change? And we have to show that different version of, well, you might be really worried about literacy at the moment. Not only will it improve that, but I know you're worried about attendance, which is affecting it as well. Guess what? When they do, particularly in a whole bunch of schools in Australia, they do music at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is when school starts. The kids don't want to miss it. So attendance skyrockets because they go, I don't want to miss music. Let's get me to school. So their attendance improves, which is going to improve their literacy as well. You get more parents into the school who may be disengaged from their child's education if you put a music concert on. I worked at a school that the parents just did not want to step on school grounds. And we had a universal violin program, and they did violin for 10 minutes every single morning of the week. They didn't take their instruments home, but we put on a concert every time, and they would come in and do a little bit of a concert, and then they would have the parent-teacher interviews in the middle, and then they'd finish it off with a little concert. And the parents were far more open to coming in for that because music had been the thing that had brought them in. Every school is different, every context is different, but I think looking at the ways that it is important, it's not just for some children, and what gets in the way and how can we help improve that. But I think also winning over a head teacher to say, here's the research, which is, again, the work that I find important. I love reading the research. I know I'm very strange, but I love reading it and going, okay, if I had to teach this to someone else, how would I say it? How would I write it? What would I do? That's the stuff for me that's really important to produce and share so that parents can do it as well, so educators can do it as well. Anyone can go, look, here's this really, really rigorous research in plain language that you can help understand, and here are the benefits that come from it.
If you had 2 minutes with a head teacher of a school or the parent of a prospective new learner to convince them to tap into music provision, what would you say?
Okay, two entirely different audiences. So I'll get myself my 4 minutes because I would approach them entirely differently. It's really, really important because the focus of the head teacher is the school, the performance of the students, the cohesion of the students, all of those things. The focus of the parent is on one particular child, their child, and what is best for them. So for me, it's like chalk and cheese. I'd start with the head teacher. I often start with asking them questions and going, what is the most concerning thing for you for the quality of the education you're delivering? And it'll start with, our literacy scores are low. I'm really struggling with that. You know, we've had Ofsted, we're not looking good in that respect. Or it's like the behaviour problems are getting in the way of all the learning. And they'll come up with something. And then what the next thing is I often do is go, okay, I'll go along that line. Let's take the behaviour issues. Yep, totally understand that the behaviour issues are a real problem, and it's something that we're dealing with all over the place. It's really interesting, the research that I work with, which is that music learning improves social cohesion and the sense of belonging and the sense of connection and the sense of what's called pro-social behaviour, which is literally just kids being kind to each other. It really improves it incredibly quickly. We're talking within, sort of 3 months of starting, you're going to see a measurable change of the behaviour in your school. And I love giving timings so they can go, oh, wow, by next term I could see this, and by the following year I could see this. I would talk about the fact that, you're going to have calmer classrooms. And with that is going to become calmer teachers because they're not dealing with the behaviour and they can actually get on with the learning that you want to do. If I'd get to the end of my 2 minutes, I'd go, does that sound good? Is that something that, do you think could be helpful in your school? If the head teacher says yes, or if they go, look, I get it, but sport could do exactly the same thing, they might counter it. And I'd come back with saying, absolutely, sport can do the same thing. But what we now understand about the research is that sport is fantastic for the body, but is not necessarily developing the brain development. Music, good for the body, but really supercharges the brain development. So how about we put those two things together? How about we take care of brain and body for the students, improve that behaviour so you get the educational outcomes you want? What do you think about that? And then I get them the next 2 minutes and the next 2 minutes. I like advocating in response to the person I'm talking to, as opposed to going, this is the steps I will go through. Because I actually find that if you don't hit it first and get that person in, and I look for a weird thing, I look for what I call the light behind their eyes, which is when they sort of either lean forward, head teachers do this, they suddenly lean forward. If they've got their arms crossed, they take them down. Or if they're sideways onto me, they'll turn straight onto me. So any of those little tells, I go, oh, I got you. Okay, let's follow that one down the line. For the parent, often I start with the parent. I go, did you learn a musical instrument or sing in a choir? Nah, never did any of that sort of stuff. Oh, if you got the opportunity now, do you think you'd want to give it a go? Like, oh, maybe, but I don't have time, or I don't feel very confident about that. Any educator can pick up how a child is pretty quickly. It's like, I can see he's jiggling his leg a lot and he's moving around. Is he struggling a little bit with his attention in class? And then I'll often get the parent to go, oh, yeah. And suddenly they've turned to me. They're like, oh, I'm interested. And they'll say, look, it's really interesting. The research shows that music learning is fantastic for settling the rhythms within his brain and his body, which means he can actually pay attention for longer. Probably, I guess you're seeing that the attention span is not so great. You'll often get the parent at that point going, yeah, there are clothes all over the house. He loses a shoe every day, all of these things. So you start to reel that parent in going, I understand your child and I'm here to help them. And then getting them to that point where they sort of go, look, learning a musical instrument could be really good. How about we try out something? Usually with kids who are jiggling around, percussion is really, really, really good. But if it is a brass instrument, often trombone can be great because it requires the most amount of movement and it requires them to coordinate their body. And then going, okay, how about we try this out? Let's get him on percussion and get him on trombone, see which one he likes. We'll go with that one for a given period of time, 6 months, and we'll see what happens. But, let's give him a try at it, see how he improves. It's going to be tricky at the start because his attention's going to be really challenged. But 3 months in, I reckon we're going to start to see small changes, and you're going to see, he doesn't lose his shoes every day, every second day. It might happen, but then, let's see what happens in the next 6 months. So I like preparing anybody for what's the timeline of what you're going to see. What might that thing look like? And ultimately, I've fed into how does that ease the burden of the parent and the concern of the parent about how their child is experiencing the world and therefore how their education is progressing. And that's my personal way of doing it. I've watched a lot of people model that way, and they're finding their own style in that and finding a way to connect with a head teacher or a parent, but on the space of going, music learning is good for everybody. And how do we make it good for either your group of students in a school or your individual child?
So if you're a parent and you've got a non-musical background, what can a parent do to best support their child's learning, especially around brass bands?
The first thing is to acknowledge that it's really daunting. And that's where a partnership between the brass teacher or the brass band leader and the parent, and making sure that they are aware of what does the music learning process look and sound and feel like. We're in this really interesting situation where, great, learn a brass instrument, but it's the brass instrument that comes straight into your lounge room. Nothing else comes home from school like that. You know, not even soccer balls. It's like they're outside. Whereas suddenly you get a beginner trumpet player in your lounge room. And there is no other way to play beginner trumpet but loud. So as music educators, leaders of any description with kids, we need to be a lot better at sort of front-ending it for the parents and going, okay, here's all the logistics of what we need, but here's what it sounds like. Here's what you're going to hear. And one of the big things that I hear from parents is, I have heard the same song for 8 weeks. And they're going, why aren't they moving on? Why aren't they doing something else? And the thing is, we haven't prepared the parent for the fact that there's a lot of repetition in music, because every time they play it, we're trying to improve something a little bit more. And if anything, what we're trying to do is make the brain go from conscious thought to what's called automation. So basically, you know that point where you pick up your instrument and you just play and you're not really thinking? We're not using a lot of energy. That's the point we're trying to get students to. And I love watching them when they're like beginner students. At some point, there's this little clunk where they just go, oh, I know where my fingers have to go. And that's a really important step for them to take. So preparing parents for the fact there's a lot of repetition. And there's a lot of different ways. Again, I love telling stories because I think it helps. There was a parent, she had a beginner brass band in year 5 here, which are kids who are 10. What she did is she, every single week to the parents, she sent home like it was a tiny audio recording, maybe 10 seconds. And she recorded them and they were learning hot cross buns. And each week she'd send them home and she'd send like a few dot points saying, today we learned how to get our instrument out of our case and sit properly and all those sorts of things. And she said, this is what we sounded like. And so she sent it up. Now, you can imagine it didn't sound a thing like hot cross buns at the beginning, but she sent it every single week. And then they had a concert in week 10, which is our terms at 10 weeks. And the parents came in, they played hot cross buns, and the parents were like, oh my God, you are a magician. How on earth did you get them from what they sounded like in week 1 to what they sound like now when we can actually recognize it? And that to me was a perfect way to very, very slowly ease non-musical parents into the music learning journey, because she kind of took them along the way, but she guided their thinking and she got them on board. What was fascinating is it was a 2-year program, and at the end, the kids get to select if they want to continue. And her retention rate was below 20% usually. When she tried this with the parents, the retention rate was 80% into the 3rd year of learning. So I think there's a whole bunch of things we can do as teachers and leaders of any description to help the parents understand what it's going to sound like, what it's going to feel like. What do you say when your child, maybe 5, 6 months in, goes, I'm not having fun anymore, I don't want to do this? You know, what's the answer? And I know a lot of schools here have actually almost scripted answers for parents. And I know that sounds like you're telling me how to parent, but the parents have been so grateful. And they'll come back to the teacher and go, they said it last night and this is what I said back. And it's just helping them to understand that that child has reached a difficult point where their brain is having to really push and grow, but that's causing a lot of discomfort. And what the child is trying to do is to get themselves out of the discomfort, which any human at any age will do. But your job as a parent is to help them go through that discomfort, because when they come out the other side, what will have happened is they'll learn that discomfort is okay, I'll get through it, but also the brain literally learns how to be persistent. So there's a whole mechanism in the brain about being persistent even through discomfort. And what you've done is you've tweaked that and turned it on. And then I love saying to parents when they get through it the first time, now we're going to do this again and again and again. And that little switch is going to become so strong that they're going to get to something hard and go, oh, that's fine. I've done music. I've been through this before. This is not nearly as bad as going through it when I can't get a particular note or can't, I'm not having fun anymore. So I think we can do a whole bunch better with our parents and making sure that they're our students as well.
That's such a good lesson, particularly when we know that so many young people are struggling with resilience, particularly children that were in earlier stages through COVID lockdowns and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Resilience is a challenging skill that not all of them have had the opportunity to learn. So it's really good to hear that, no, there's a really clear link that participating in music making can help build that particular skill that we know is really needed right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really fascinating that for me, I've got a 2.5-year-old. It's really opened my eyes so much to how lucky and privileged I am to have already participated in music.
Yeah.
We have a very musical household and there are instruments that he can grab and there are plastic mouthpieces that he tries to have go on all the time. It's just there. Yeah. And I really notice when he's singing something back or keeps a beat. But it's really challenging if you haven't got those skills and you've never done music to recognize that and encourage that in the home. It makes me feel incredibly lucky to have had music given to me as a gift as a child and encouraged throughout my life.
I think what I do love parents when they come to me and go, I know every child is special, but my child is so musical. And I feel like I don't want to burst their bubble, but saying every child is musical. And they really are, because at birth, the music processing network is highly active. And the reason it is because that's how a child identifies its carers. So they hear all language as if it's a melody. I love saying that to parents because you can hear them go, oh. It's like hearing mum's voice is actually like hearing music. And it is true. It's true all the way through our lives. All sound is processed by the brain for its musical qualities. So it's a very powerful and important part of the brain at the beginning of life, but it's actually the most important part when it comes to their auditory development. It's our largest information gathering skill. And then moving to music actually teaches our body how to move with intention. So I love watching kids try and keep to the beat and they're ever so behind. You can almost see that it's going in their ears and then it's talking to their limbs and going, this is what you need to do next. So it serves so many purposes through development, and it's such an important thing to do. And all we do by learning music as part of it is we just supercharge that all the way through their first 7 years particularly.
Anita, I'm confident that we could sit here and quiz you all day.
Excellent.
And hopefully we'll get a chance to do that another time, but we will let you get on with your evening. Thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating. How can people who have listened to the podcast and want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
So Bigger, Better Brains is my work that I do that is absolutely for musicians and music educators to understand the research, but also figure out how to advocate differently and in a more impactful way. I have a website, anitacollinsmusic.com.au, where people can see the other work I do, which is helping lots of different schools and systems and countries even to improve music education. And I write a lot. Just Google me and have a look at, if you haven't already, my TED Talk, which was titled, What If Every Child Had Music Education from Birth? And the TED Ed video, How Learning an Instrument Benefits Your Brain.
Fantastic. Encourage all listeners to go and find out more. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll speak soon.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Now we know how brass banding and music playing more generally is so good for you. We need to shout about it more. Everyone needs to shout about it a little bit more. There's a lot of bemoaning often on Facebook groups and in bands that the young people aren't there and they're not coming through, and what do we do, and this is going to be the end. Do you think that's the case? Do you think we're not seeing those people come through and play?
No, I think the exact opposite. I think we are seeing them coming through, and at certain places we're seeing them coming through extremely well. It sounds like a broken record, but I always keep saying, if you can do it somewhere, you can do it anywhere with brass bands with the same approach. Where you see great examples. We were talking in the last episode about our youth champs and how incredible it was. We had 40 youth bands there. We could have had 50, we could have had 60. We had to turn bands away in the end. We're thinking seriously about ways to be able to expand it, which is logistically very, very difficult. So in terms of the youth work that is going on, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And there's a lot of it around the country. Yeah, and we see them on media, we see it on BBC, we see it in newspapers sometimes, this is brass bands are in decline because such and such a band in a certain area has hit hard times. And there can be a million different reasons for that to have happened to these bands. For every one of these, there's 10 success stories somewhere else if the media wanted to go looking for them. We know where they are and we frequently point them to them, but somehow that doesn't make as good a story for some people. There's no question that banding is in a healthy state in certain areas, in certain places, in certain organisations that are just utterly sustainable communities within themselves. How do you measure it collectively? Do you talk about the number of bands that go to competitions as a measure of success? How do bands individually gauge their own success? Is it purely by competition performance? Or is it the mentions they get in the local newspaper, or the number of pints they drink in the pub after the rehearsal on a Friday night? I don't know, but it should be down to everybody to make their own future and make their own decisions. And I think there's enough good practice there, and it's always been a big part of our work at BBE to try and get that good practice out there for as many people as possible to see that it is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that if banding wants to be healthy in the future, it can and will be.
Yeah.
But if we go looking for sob stories and looking for, are we ever going to get back to the days when we'd fill the Albert Hall with 5,500 people on a Saturday afternoon and get it all over in time to get the results on the football programme at 4:30? No, it's changing is the bottom line, and it has to change.
And people's expectations have changed a lot about what a band should offer them. We've seen a really significant change for players. If we go back to some of the origins of the band being a well-being service for players, actually we're seeing a shift now in a lot of ways. The players are kind of customers to the band and that's a really big shift to go through. We can't continue as we are without recognising that change. And I think that's the same when we think about bringing young people into the band. We're looking at going up against the local tennis club, and there's a level of professionalism that is expected there. And I think so much of the work that we've done around safeguarding has helped bands spread that message. People feel there's a lot more confidence that they have all of that stuff together and they've communicated that and they feel more supported, and that helps them have a more professional outlook to parents. But I think in terms of teaching and experience, there's a lot of people still feel they need support and they're not sure where it comes from. And I think our Future Leaders programme has been a really incredible lens on some of those individuals. We had people who had been primary teachers and retired, had excellent teaching ability, but it needed more support applying that from a musical lens. We had peripatetic teachers who needed more support on teaching in a band environment. We had people who had their professional life had never touched education or music, but they'd thrown themselves in as a volunteer and just wanted to do it well. And that programme was able to support all of those people. They've come out of it with a qualification and significantly more confidence and competence in doing that. And I think the more that we support educators to be as good as they can be, the better we're going to serve the young people that are coming through bands as well. The expectation that it's free and they get an instrument, therefore they should want to keep coming is unrealistic. But I think that attitude is definitely still there.
I think one thing I would like to see more of is people who play in bands and involved in running bands to get more interested in it. It seems that a lot of people are interested in their own band and what they're doing as a band, and actually there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it can be so much more rewarding if you actually go out and listen to somebody else doing it. A few weeks ago I went to the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain in London, a really fantastic concert. And I looked around, great audience, it was a really nice capacity audience in the Royal College of Music. It was a brilliant concert. And there was a lot of parents there, as you'd expect. There were probably a number of what you call invited guests, but very few people from the brass band community that just went and bought a ticket because it was a National Youth Band, and they always do. You could say that about just about any organisation like that, or a lot of big banding events like the National and the British Open and whatever. Fewer and fewer of your day-to-day banders are actually interested enough to go. to these things. And one of the things we found out at our youth champs, twice that we've run it now, the most rewarding thing about that is watching the players listen to other players.
Yeah,
and saying, this is what you can do. I spoke about my own experience of learning most in the band room, but I've probably learned just as much sitting listening to the great players as well, great bands. I've spent probably as much time as almost anybody sitting listening to brass band performances, especially over the last 20 years. Every single part of it is a learning experience. If all we do is doing our own wee bit of banding in a bubble, clearly you're not going to have as much to expand on. And I think the more that we actually can interact with each other, collaboration, I think is the word, then the better it's going to be for everybody.
Yeah, I think so. There was one of my favourite moments at Youth Champs, actually. It was Maybury band, who were a school band in Hull, took part. They were brilliant. They were so enthusiastic, great energy. They got a wonderful head teacher. They had a ship that they had made as a prop that was on wheels as part of their performance. It was brilliant. But they made a real effort to keep the kids there so that they could listen to the older bands later in the day. And they were sat at the top of the balcony watching one of the championship bands, and the kids were transfixed completely, all of them. This is a school band. They've been playing for, an academic year, maybe. And they just loved it. A championship band playing highbrow traditional music. They were absolutely loving it. But in seeing that inspiration there, seeing kids not that much older than them playing was a real moment.
But it gives you something to aspire to, doesn't it? I'd love to be able to play like that. I'd love to be able to play in a band like that. That's something I've carried right through my whole life. Being brought up in central Scotland, the thought of even going to the Albert Hall was like flying to the moon back then. It was a long way away before you could fly or get the train cheaply like you can now. But even going there was a distant dream, and then you get the chance to go there and you get the chance to play there, and you think, this is great, isn't it? But then you're at the stage then where you're inspiring other young people who are seeing you doing the same. And I think we've kind of lost a bit of that. People go, especially to band contests now, they go and play, and then if they're a certain age, they go to the pub or they go home. A very small amount will sit around and listen to other bands. But there's a lot to be admired in that still. I find it quite depressing, actually, when you see events like that. There's loads of participants, but they're all sitting there, with a few people in it.
Yeah. But
these are great learning opportunities that are being lost.
And how does that change?
Well, I guess every event's got to find its own way, hasn't it? I mean, we're involved with Brass and Concert. It's a different type of event. You've got top championship bands there that are all naturally going to attract an audience anyway. The music they're playing is certainly more varied. Some people might argue more attractive than your standard brass band test piece. That's just that one event that's got that advantage. But events need to kind of just self-assess, look at what you're doing. Can you do it differently? Can you attract more people to stay around for longer? There's no easy answer. You're not sitting here with all the answers. That's one thing that's for certain. But what I will say about Brass and Concert, the success of Brass and Concert is almost entirely built upon its ability to self-reflect over the last 25 years or so, especially when there's been real progress. And, that Monday morning meeting after the event, when they'll sit down and say, what went well, what could we do better? And I think if every band and every event was to do that more often, we might find a more healthy future.
Yeah, but that's a cultural shift and requires everyone to be on board with that and on board that things might change. And that's hard for people. It
is, but we don't go up chimneys or down coal mines any longer in the same way that we did 100 years ago. So there's a lot to be optimistic about, but it does take people to kind of adjust the way they think about things.
Was an excerpt from a Gabrielli fantasy by Bert Appelmont, played by the brass band Tres Etoiles at the European Championships in Stavanger. It was one of my favourite performances. I just loved it. Loved the piece, and I love that kind of blend of the traditional modernised, re-looked at?
Well, it fits in with what we've been talking about, doesn't it? We've got a very traditional culture here in transition. That music very much builds upon the most traditional music, if you like. I agree with you. Incredible playing from an amazing band that has built itself from the ground up. Always one of the big names in continental banding in Swiss, obviously, especially. But when you look around the band, there's hardly a player in it that looks like they're over 30.
Yeah.
There's one or two, but there's just so much youthful brilliance in that band. It's unbelievable. And every one of them has been created by the organisation. They've got an incredible youth band. They've got an incredible setup there. So
There you go.
a great model.
So, Kenny, just to finish off, are you feeling positive about the future of brass banding and young people joining our tradition?
I absolutely do. I don't think young people are significantly different wherever you go. I think they've all got the same kind of needs and ambitions. And I think if you show them something that's really, really good, and especially something that they can do with their friends, that's what young folk want more than anything else. They want to be in a comfortable place with their friends, doing something they all enjoy. To be honest with you, there's hardly anything better than it, for a social side. It's been incredible. I've certainly loved my banding experience. I don't think I'm that weird. But I think there's loads to be positive about. It almost entirely comes down to the experience that you give them. If it's a good one, they'll want to keep doing it. If they're bored, see you later.
So yeah, create that environment in your band room. That's the take home.
It's a secret.
Amazing. Well, great to speak to you, Kenny. We'll see you soon for the next episode of the Brass Band Podcast. This series of the Brass Band Podcast is brought to you by Brass Bands England. Thank you to Arts Council England, National Lottery Heritage Fund and Youth Music for their support. Thanks also to World of Brass for the beautiful music they have provided. To listen to all of the music from this episode and so much more, head to wobplay.com. That's wobplay.com.
To find out more about this series and the wider work of Brass Bands England, head over to our website at bbe.org.uk and follow us on social media.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. Make sure you subscribe to avoid missing any of our upcoming episodes and share your favourite moments on social media using the hashtag BrassBandPodcast. Thanks for listening and stay tuned.